Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett. Derek, you know, there wasn't really that much going on, I gotta say. There was no Canadian-based games this weekend. There was no Academy games, the women's Pacific 4 series games. That's all taking place this weekend, so there's not really that much to talk about when it comes to rugby, I assume. I mean, apparently there's something been going on like south of the border, between like east and west, and I just lost interest after that point. But I found the highlights on the Rugby Network, so I suppose if we have to talk about anything, we can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those that are like Stu, that just follow the Toronto Arrows most in depthly, there is a thing called the playoffs that happens in Major League Rugby. Actually, it's called the Championship Series. That's what they call it. So yeah, there's still a lot of rugby to be played. There's a lot of Canadians involved, though, Stu. So that's got to give you some reason to get excited about. I mean, like one team is literally half Canadians. And then we've had some Canadian. We've had some Canadians on podcasts, on our own podcasts, that are representing the other teams in this competition.
So that I will concede that is true. However,
what are you doing?
And this is more of an issue I have.
And it was on Canada Day too.
Yes, one of the games was on Canada Day.
Yes, so and all the Canadian players on New England sang the anthem.
They weren't, but they weren't all playing on Canada. That was the thing as well. Like the team selection, there were certain now I know that Josh Larson is out for the season and obviously isn't allowed to play. But I was thinking like a few names are missing here, and I mean with the long list that is, there
wasn't
New England. There
wasn't even an American in the New England starting 15. I don't think there was. There wasn't. There was no Americans in the New England starting 15. They're literally like, this team is always Canada, a couple guys from Namibia, and like two dudes from New Zealand. That is what this team is. One dude from Ireland.
For a team that gets its name on opposing the Union Jack and British, it's taking a lot of their former colonies players to. Anyway, let us talk about what happened on Canada Day and July 2nd. It was the conference finals. So the Eastern Conference is what kicked off on Canada Day. That was between New England and DC. And, New England have been clearing away the dominant force in the East, the beasts of the East, as we would say. And they have an incredible home record this season, unbeaten at home. And was it unbeaten at home or was it?
Oh yeah, no, they're unbeaten at home. They're unbeaten at home, and they're unbeaten. They're unbeaten at home, and they're undefeated against the Eastern Conference this year.
That's it. I was just making sure. I knew that they'd beaten all the East, but they've had a couple of losses, and that's from Western teams. Yes, so I just want to. So we get the game underway at Veteran Memorial Stadium, and set the pace with the home side with LaRue Milan getting the first try with a good offload from Andrew Quattrin as well to get that Canada Day feeling going pretty well. Then it looked as though it was going to be another try from the hands of LaRue Milan. However, the pass that he received was deemed as forward, so it was brought back. Eventually ended up being a line out and a driving maul. And, Andrew Quattrin, again, being the player needed where he's needed most, getting on that ball. But that driving maul had everyone coming in, even Ben Lesage, who was running in just to help strengthen that. And then the ball started down and the conversion was missed, which was disappointing for Potras. But, already getting off to a 12-0 lead. So definitely two scores going to be needed. And, New England's defense was just fantastic, refused to let DC get any score whatsoever, no tries. So we get into the second half and it looks like DC is trying to get some things stringed together until there's a knock on. And because New England are already pressing so hard with the defense, they're instantly able to find a gap in the attack. And it ends up getting passed out to Philemone, who scores the third try. for New England. This one is converted, and Potras has also like picked up a couple penalties as well. So, we're now getting to New England 25, DC nil. And then just when you think things couldn't get worse for DC, it looks as though another knock-on has resulted in a try. However, this was called back again for infringement until finally we get DC kicking into the corner, going for driving maul. It gets out, threaten Palermo. His name's he's got threat in his name, so he's going to be a threat for any defense. Finally, gets it over when Diaz Bonilla does a crossfield kick, a very awkward collision between him and the New England players. Seemed to be like a clash of heads, but I think that's a case of like, this is why you need to tackle correctly. And but yeah, it was basically to avoid being whitewashed, essentially. The final score in the match, which left the overall result as New England 25, DC 7. And considering how dominant New England have been against Eastern teams this year, now admittedly, in one of their encounters, it was only a scores difference between New England and DC, but still, I mean, obviously, being Arrow supporters, we've seen their result be much higher than 25 against Eastern opposition, but kept it mature, kept it rational, calm heads around them, did the job they need to do. Yes, there were these infringements that ended up costing them tries, but the speed was there, the ability to find these gaps, especially when it's happened, the ability to turn momentum and like just from a knock on or accidental play and come back, shows that there is definite fight in this New England team. And incredible resilience from DC to essentially keep them within 25 points and able to get that try at the end. But yeah, definitely enjoyable game to watch, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good game. I mean, ultimately, pretty predictable result at the end of the day. I mean, I think with both of these finals, I mean, the whole season, it's kind of seemed destined that we've been destined towards a San Diego New England final. So, this was obviously the first game up on that, and good on New England for taking care of business. And I mean, like, realistically, like, I mean, this game was 25-7, 18-0 at halftime. I think it felt a little bit bigger than that. I mean, I think New England came out the gate. They had 2 tries in the opening 12 minutes of the game, plus another try that was disallowed, as you said, for a forward pass. But it's just ultimately, they came out like full throttle, guns blazing, and really drove and dictated the pace of the game, drove the pace of the game. We're capitalizing on, penalties, any mistake that Old Glory made, New England made them pay for it. It's really part of, it's really what makes them so good, right? And it's, tries are coming from different, like the 3 tries that they scored, they're all kind of coming from different areas, right? Like, we got Milan's try, which is, off good face play, opening up the defense. They did that really quick because that was in the first 4 minutes. Quatrin scores a try through the driving maul, the typical, the standard like hooker try. And it's against DC, who's actually pretty good at defending the maul too, but didn't really.
I actually saw like in that in Quatrin's try, if you go back, Kyle Bailey is reaching over and New England are just swarming so much that they're actually lifting him off his feet. Yeah. So he's actually being carried. Yeah. Which is one way to get him out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, it's legal. Yeah. It all works. But yeah, like, so like you have that try. And obviously, like you said, like, I mean, Bailey and Old Glory are usually pretty good at defending the maul. But obviously it was too much this time. And then, like, Philemon's try at the end, it's it's a beautiful grubber kick through from Ben Lesage, right? They're attacking with pace, they're getting, creative, a little bit of, the cheeky kick through, and Philemon's able to capitalize on that, right? So they're showing that they can, like, as part of what makes them such a good team is they can use their speed. They can play that, like, almost like that finesse style, but then when they need to, like, in the rucks, they're tough to beat in the rucks. Guys like Conradi, Johnston, like they're not fun people to see at the breakdown. Right. You got like Keys and O'Gorman, big, strong locks in the engine room, kind of help drive that scrum forward. The scrums, like they've kind of built if you wanted to build a rugby team in a lab, you're probably kind of wanting to make it look like New England right now. And so I guess Tom Kinley kind of accomplished that. But ultimately, yeah, like I think it's they totally deserve everything they've gotten up to this point in this season. Like they were easily the best team in the Eastern Conference all year. Like it's like we talked about, how like the poor records of the other Eastern Conference teams, and I mean like like even right now you give DC their 2 playoff games on top of the regular season. Now they're 8-1, I guess, all year, right? Like that's a playoff team, and that's a team that got to the East Final, right? And they're below 500 when it's all said and done in the year. And so I mean, like New England's been the absolute dominant team, and they totally deserve to be there. Do you want to talk about the San Diego Seattle game, and then because I kind of want to circle back to something that I've been kind of looking at, and I feel like as we go into the MLR final this week, maybe something that kind of makes England and San Diego both so good, and maybe why they're find themselves in the position that they do find themselves in.
Okay, yeah,
but maybe
we'll circle back on that point. Let's talk about San Diego and Seattle in the Western Conference Final. Okay, so Derek, if last week I was to ask you what would be the first scoring moment of the Western Conference Final, what are the odds that you would have said it would have been a drop goal? And then what are the odds saying that the scorer of that drop goal would be Ma Nonu?
Oh, 100%. I called that. I would have, we should have talked about it on the podcast, but 100%. I was thinking that the whole time. And at no point was I shocked to see that.
Okay, well, in reality.
Oh, that's my reality. Hey, you can't prove that I didn't think that. Prove it.
Yeah, all right. I'll believe you for now.
Need to record things more. But hey.
Anyway, let's talk about the rest of the game after that brilliant. I'm surprised anyone was able to continue after that.
I was gonna say, Nanu's really just out here having fun, right? Like,
oh, absolutely. He's here. He's enjoying the San Diego sun. He's, they got good rapport with their fans. There was great attendance, and especially being in Snapdragon Stadium, you could hear like the sound anytime San Diego had the ball.
Yeah,
cheers were going around, so always good to hear. So yeah, and this pretty similar game in the basis of there was one team that was completely in control throughout this entire matchup, and that was San Diego. After Nonu's drop goal, we then have Will Hooley getting his only penalty in the game, but he had more kicks to come, because basically 2 minutes after that penalty, Pifoletti goes over for the first try of the game, in what I'm going to describe as Seattle's seawall just not paying attention at the right point, and he's going over. There we go, and that would be the only scores for San Diego for that half. Now, for Seattle, Chait was able to get a penalty a minute before half time, so go into the sheds. San Diego in a respectable lead. I think it would have been 13-3 at that point. And then they remember this is not only the Western Conference Final. This is up against Seattle, the old enemy, the team that has beaten San Diego the most in the postseason, going all the way back to 2018 in the semifinals, the championship final in 2019, and even the eliminator last year. And Seattle were 3-0 against San Diego, and they're like, no, now's the time to make history. So we get into the second half, and Naoaki gets his try in the 57th minute. And then we have Marcel Brosh getting his try in the 62nd minute. And not Brosh, Brocky's try in the 62nd minute and being between the sticks. That's also working well. So we have a good total, an extra 14 points on for San Diego. And then in about the 65th minute, Landry is able to get a try after Sylvia is yellow carded. So, taking that man advantage, Seattle getting on the board. And then, now, I don't know if you ever heard of the commentator's curse, but just before the ball is going to be kicked off to start the the final 15 minutes of the game, and the commentators saying like, oh, it's Seattle 10, San Diego 25. Can Seattle bring it back from here? And San Diego somehow heard that and were just like, no, absolutely not, because the ball gets kicked off and Aoaki is right there, doesn't even lose stride. He is unobstructed. He grabs the ball, gets it over. That's the try. The only kick at post that Hooley misses all game. And at that point, any momentum that could have gone Seattle's way after scoring that try evaporates in an instant. And the Legion see out the clock, kick it into touch after 80 minutes to lead the final score: San Diego 32, Seattle 10.
Yeah, I just want to say that I totally agree with you that that second Aoki try right after Landry scored, and the commentator spent like 2 minutes being like, well, it's like, yeah, you only got like this amount of time left. It's like, you could do it. It's a 3-possession game. And then immediately to be like, oh, this is over. It's just over. Was kind of hilarious to watch as a person that's not a Seattle Seawolves fan. I think though, this game was, again, another one where, the final result kind of felt destined. With, as I said, it's like much like, despite the fact that the Western Conference has been obviously much better than the Eastern Conference this year, and Seattle realistically was right on San Diego's tails all year. San Diego looked to be clear and above the best team in the league, or the best team in the Western Conference. I guess we'll find out this week if they look like the best team in the league or not. So it kind of feels kind of destined. I think this game really was a lot of fun. It was a good Ma Nanu game. Nice from the All Black legend there. Like I said before, it just looks like he's having the most fun just playing in a league that is absolutely elite to like 99.9% of the players in this league. But to him, it's like, going to the park on a Saturday afternoon. And he looks like he's just having the best time doing it. Had obviously hit the drop goal to start the game, but he also had 13 tackles. He was third on San Diego in tackles made in this game. He had plenty of carries. He was getting kicking meters in this. He was basically, he was doing it all. Good at the breakdown and stuff too. Like he's just showing everything why he's, a future Hall of Famer whenever he decides to hang up the cleats, and is clearly having a blast playing in Major League Rugby, right? So that was obviously, great to see. And, San Diego just kind of showing realistically, just kind of showing how clinical they are. Every try was, well orchestrated. They even like that one that ultimately clinched the match there with that second Aoki try. It's like, I don't know, you can't really draw up a restart any better than that. And yeah, man, like they're dominant. They're back. Their pack is incredible. They have guys on the bench in their pack, like Michael Smith, Chris Bauman, Isaac Ross, that other teams in the league would kill to have in their starting 15. They have guys that didn't play in this game that other teams would kill to have in their starting 15 as well. They're so well built across the board. Guys like Hooley and Teo, Augsburger, Brocky, like their back line is incredible. It's just threats across the entire back line, no matter what that combination is. Like there is not a player in that back line that if they get the ball in their hand, like within the 22, that you're not concerned about being able to score. Like every single one of those players in their back line is an attacking threat at all times. And as they've shown throughout the season, they're an attacking threat at all times, no matter where they are on the field, right? And the pack is insane. They're so good at the line out. Their scrum is incredible. The fact that Grant is like 6'40", and like however tall, 6'9", I guess is the real answer, not my dumb exaggeration there, but like insanely tall, but so accurate. They're so like just every line out's perfect in execution. The set piece is great. Like they're I just said that if you wanted to build a rugby team in a lab, it's New England, but the lab across the street's probably working on building San Diego. And yeah, man, that's just an absolutely phenomenal season from both of them. And I mean, I kind of feel you got to feel for San Diego because I mean, it's they had a great year as well. Guys like Charlie Elton will probably be like in the conversation for like team of the year and like just outstanding leading in like the tackle, like high up on the tackles count, rucks, breakdowns. Like Ronan Foley has been phenomenal the last like month or two. Right, obviously Reichert Hadding, despite missing all that time, is still among the league's leading try scorers. Their team is another team that's absolutely loaded. And in any other year, this is probably a team that is capable of winning an MLR Shield. The biggest problem though is they had to run into San Diego, and San Diego, much like New England, is just kind of operating on a completely different level than the rest of the league right now.
Yeah, it's gonna definitely be interesting in Chicago this coming Saturday when San Diego, I say San Diego host. They technically will be designated the host team because they finished higher in terms of table points, but it's a neutral venue for both of them. So that home ground advantage kind of goes out the window. So it's going to be really interesting, but we will get into the discussion of who do we think is going to win and what they need, blah, 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 later when we make our MLR Championship predictions.
So should I go into like my theory on what makes them so good or why they're here and like what makes like, I mean, I know we don't have to do
which team?
Both of them. Both of them.
I say, actually,
I'm gonna,
give it now and allow me to simmer, and then I'll make my pitch when it comes to our predictions. Okay.
Oh, I'm not pitching who's gonna win. I'm just saying.
No. I'm just saying, like when we come to pitching it, it'll help. It'll help me out. It'll help our listeners out, and we'll go from there.
So I think it's fair to say, right, that San Diego and New England have been the two best teams in the league all year.
Yes, that is correct.
I think that's fair. Like New England, we obviously mentioned, had completely dominated their conference. They were easily the best team. San Diego did have a loss against their conference, but I mean, they were 15-1 and, set the MLR record for the longest winning streak and a whole bunch of other accolades that they're going to have that they made the Seattle Seawolves look like not the best team in their conference is pretty impressive. Yeah. So the GM for San Diego, or the director of rugby, is Danny Lee. The director of rugby for New England, or the GM for New England, every team uses different titles, is Tom Kindley. And I think both of those gentlemen are huge reasons why these teams are where they are. And I think, which one do you want me to do first, San Diego or New England?
Do San Diego as they're the home team first.
All right. Okay, we'll go San Diego. And to generalize, I think what makes both teams really good is the way they use their domestic players. Because I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've always talked about in Major League Rugby is bringing in like, the foreign-born players, the international slots and all that. But I think both of these teams are showing that if you like manage that system properly, I think like your domestic players should be the best players on your team. right? Even
Yeah,
if
that
you
makes
are
sense.
bringing in, like you can bring in everybody to support, but if you can have a domestic core, right, it's going
Hmm.
to, like it goes a long way. And I think I look at San Diego and I look at the way that they're built. Most teams in Major League Rugby are going to have an international 8, an international
Hmm.
9, an international 10, and an international 15.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and that seems reasonable.
Seems reasonable. Okay. And maybe like an international like prop or something, a couple international props mixed in there.
Yeah, sure.
Right. San Diego, if you look at the roster that they just put out, right? They
Hmm.
had 8, they had Tamalau, right? Is American. 9 was
Hmm.
Judd, who's an international player, but 10 is Hooley and 15 is Taya, right?
Yeah.
So if you basically kind of look at the way that they are built, they have 2. And I mean, even with Judd, like Judd obviously missed a little bit of time this year. So they had Higgins. So that's another,
Mm.
domestic player that they could plug in at that spot. But so if you kind of look at San Diego, it's like they have 2 absolutely elite domestic players at 10 and 15, right? They have Hooley and Teao. Hooley's obviously a Premiership fly half, right? Played for the
Hmm.
Saracens, a bunch of other Premiership clubs, right? And Teo is a former MVP in this league. Like
Yeah.
you cannot get better in that position from a domestic standpoint, right? You also add in Tamalau, who's been incredible all year, right? And when you kind of look at that, but if you look at it and you compare it to the other teams that are even in the playoffs right now, Reichard Hadding is the only other domestic player that started at any of those positions
Mm.
in this round of the playoffs, right? And I think what that allows is by San Diego you being able to afford the way that this team is built by having an elite domestic fullback, an elite domestic fly half, and an elite domestic 8, also with the ability to, if they needed to, when Judd wasn't available, right? You have Higgins, which, even as a backup, even though he didn't play in this game, is still an elite domestic 9 too, right? Also, not to mention Augsburger, who just decided he was suddenly the best winger in the league. You have all of these options that they have where most teams build their core around elite. That's where most teams use their international slots. San
Yeah.
Diego's using domestic players where most teams use their international slots, which allows them to use their international slots at places that other teams aren't using them. So you end up with 4 of the 5, like 5 is international players. So other teams are using Canadians and Americans in that spot. San Diego's got super rugby guys in their second row, right? And they have kind of constructed that whole thing where it's also, though, because they can do that, their bench is mostly domestic guys like Mike Smith, Nathan Sylvia, Shiloh Klein, Chris Bauman, Chris Turi, right? Ryan Mathias coming off all came off the bench in this game, but those guys are also some of the best domestic players too, right?
Yeah.
League, so that they can fill out those slots. The the base of like their starting lineup is guys like Poitevin, who has shown that he's one of the best flankers in the league, right, for a couple of years now, right, and he's American. But like where they have all of these guys, I feel, especially with Hooley and Teo, because most teams don't have that luxury of having an American fly half and an American fullback, right?
Mm.
Which is
Yeah.
crazy. And then that allows them to shift everywhere else. But also like having a guy like Brocky, right? That's an elite American player too at center with Ma Nanu. It's kind of crazy. So that's part of why I think like I wonder if more teams, like if you can develop or sign like domestic fly halves and fullbacks, like maybe there's something that there, because I think it opens up more possibilities for how San Diego can build their roster, because they don't need to go out and sign players at positions that most other teams are signing guys from international slots, which also leads me to New England. Right, which I
Mm.
think Tom Kinley has done a brilliant job of targeting players, especially domestic players, that for some reason a lot of teams in Major League Rugby just don't seem to go after all that much. And that's in two areas. Obviously, I think you have Wayne Conradi and LaRue Milan are from Namibia, which is a country that, I mean, who do you got? Damian Stevens on NOLA. How many Namibian guys are in the league? Like,
you could count them on your hands.
Yeah, like I think. Yeah, there's probably another one. Those are the three off the top of my head I can think of. There's probably more, but it's like you have that, but also Canada. And I know, like, we are the Rouge Rugby podcast, and I know we often joke about, the team with the most Canadians is going to win. We make that joke all the time, but I genuinely kind of think that there is actually something to that. If you're going after players that for whatever reason other teams don't seem to go after, right? And in this case, I think but of course, much like San Diego, though, they're not just like going after any Canadians. They got, look at their off-season Canadian signings this year. It was, Andrew Quattrin, Cole Keith, Spencer Jones, Connor Keys, Ben Lesage, right?
Yeah.
Those are the 5 Canadian players that they signed from other MLR teams this year. But Connor Young also signed, but he wasn't playing in MLR last year. But like, if you take that into like account, it's the same thing. It's like they're getting like elite domestic players, which they can kind of like they are able to bring over, which again allows them to do a couple more creative things with their international slots. And obviously they have more international slots. The entire New England starting lineup in this game was Canadians and international players. There is no Americans in the starting 15, right? In a weird way, it kind of makes me excited because this is how the Toronto Arrows are built. They just have been playing a lot better rugby, but it's kind of how the Arrows are built. But the thing that's interesting with that, though, too, is if you can, we'll do a little trivia, Stu. Who was the first 2 teams to win the MLR Shield?
Seattle.
Right.
Seattle.
Which American team had the most Canadians in those 2 seasons?
Seattle,
right? But like in the first year, especially in the first year, what did Seattle? Because Curry Hitchborn, we know, was on that, and we talked about him on how Hitchborn building the team. Seattle went after players in one region that nobody else touched, which was BC.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's like a bit of a, like, I don't want to necessarily say like a lesson and stuff, but it's like, I think the way that these 2 teams have been using like domestic slots is so fascinating to me. Whereas like you have Danny Lee being like domestic fly half, domestic fullback, domestic 8. They have a bunch of domestic 9s, even though Judd starts. But right, and be like, okay, if you can get these guys to be domestic players, right, that means we have so many more options with what you can do with those international slots, right? And then I think it's the same with New England too, where it's like, like there's an entire other country of players that are available to you to use as, that count as domestically eligible players. Or even a guy like Jason, or even like, back to San Diego, but even a guy like Jason Higgins, who nobody even knew was Canadian until he tried to sign with New York, right?
Yeah.
And you can find these guys that are eligible. And I think it's like, it weirdly is like if you are, for some reason, all these Canadians are gravitating toward New England. For whatever reason that is, I don't know. Maybe it's like Josh Larson running the recruiting strategy as the captain. Maybe that's a big help.
Yeah.
Maybe the proximity to, certain parts of Canada to the border, like Boston's not that far from the border if you live on the East Coast of Canada. Right. Maybe that kind of helps. But like both of these teams use, like, there's more Canadians on New England than Americans. Both of these teams are built using domestic slots completely different than any of the other teams in the league. And I wonder if any of the other teams in the league are going to kind of start looking at, maybe you want that domestic fly half, that domestic fullback. Maybe you should be signing some more Canadians because maybe, like, if you want, if you need like a flanker or something, it's like guys like Mike Smith exist, right? Like, the Arrows only have so many slots. And I mean, again, I know the Arrows finished last this year, but it's true that the Arrows only have so many slots. Like, not every Canadian player is going to play for the Arrows. Like, go get the other Canadian players. Like, they're there and they're helping. They're there and they're helping New England absolutely dominate this league. Like, a team of literally a team of Canadians is dominating the league. Rest of the league, go get more Canadians, please. But then San Diego.
I can get where you're coming from as well, as in, because especially a number of these players, former Arrows themselves. Like, some of them have gone different paths together. Like, for example, Ben Lesage went to LA, then to New England.
Quatrin went to Utah technically too.
Yeah, that's true. And you don't.
Very few of these guys have gone direct. Only Jones and Keith can say they technically went straight from the Arrows to New England, despite all the jokes about the Arrows being New England's development team. It's only
at the same time, you don't want it to be a case of with especially like the Arrows, focusing on developing Canadian talent, which is why they've signed a lot of young Canadians to the squad this year. Now, admittedly, that may also be due to injury issues and cover and stuff like that, which is a different thing. But so I understand, as in, I don't want it to be a case of the Arrows make them and MLR takes them, kind of thing.
No, I don't want it.
I want it to be the reverse thing. I want it to be a Canadian goes to, like, if the Arrows could sign Michael Smith, fantastic. But
okay, so here's the thing, though. I agree with you. I don't want it to be like, exactly. The Arrows develop it and then they sign elsewhere or whatever. But if anything, just watching New England absolutely run the show in this league, in the Eastern Conference especially, does that not get you somewhat excited as an Arrows fan? Because this is what the Arrows are trying to do.
Yeah.
This is what they did in 2019. This is what they
and 2020.
And 2020. This is what they've spent. Actually, that's another good point, because there's in theory, in our fantasy world where the Expos won the 1994 World Series, that never happened, and the Toronto Arrows won the 2020 MLR Shield, right, to add to the Canadian championship total here. But to follow that up, right, it's like, again, 2020, best team in the league before COVID hit, all the Canadians. Like, it actually, if you go through the league, the history of the league, it does somewhat check out that this works. And I think if you're an Arrows fan, like, honestly, like, watching New England has to get you excited, not so much because there's players that have connections with the Arrows or have been or are former Arrows on the team, but just simply because, like, New England is proving that a team of basically nearly all Canadians, supported by some international players in the proper spots with the proper talent, but also, like, going to countries like Namibia or Uruguay or where, like, some of those nations that the Arrows Uruguay as a nation the Arrows went to, right? Or like Namibia, like what the New England's doing. It's like, this works. If you're an Arrows fan, like, I don't know how, if you're an Arrows fan, you don't look at this and be like, it's the Arrows. It's almost the Arrows model. It's like, pick all the best Canadian players you can get to sign for you, couple international guys here and there. I don't know what step 3 is, but step 4 is win the Eastern Conference. Step 5 is win the Shield. We'll see if they actually accomplish that. But I don't know. I think, like, if everything goes right for the Arrows, that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from.
I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll stew on that for a moment as we move on to the Pacific 4 series, which is back underway. So Australia hosted New Zealand, which is obviously much easier to do than both teams coming over to Canada and then playing an extra weekend to very little fanfare. And, there's a reason why the Black Ferns are the world champions, as can be found in the final score, which was Australia 0, New Zealand 50. So that Now, this means that two teams have scored 50 points in the Pacific Four Series, with obviously Canada winning their earlier fixture in Madrid against the United States, 50-17. So that technically puts Canada second, just on point difference, but that can all change this coming weekend when they take on New Zealand. With that, we have received the announcement that Canada have their 30-woman list for the games in Ottawa, with captain Sophie de Goody returning to that role and vice captain being announced as Justine Pelletier. It looks set to be a very interesting opportunity for these women, and we have a list of 6 uncapped players that could be making their debut in the Pacific Fours. That includes Maya Brubasha, Sarah Klein, Ashlyn Smith, Olivia Apps, Claire Gallagher, and Florence Simmons. Now, Olivia Apps was called up to the World Cup squad in 2022, but she didn't actually play in any of those games, not even named on the bench. So she's still open to be able to play for her first cap either this weekend or next. But, we have, some familiar names. I believe there's 22 members of the World Cup squad included in this list of 30, including Forteza, Bokaboom, McKinley Hunt, who was also recently announced that she has been signed to, I was going to say the Premier 15s, but they're going through a whole rebranding exercise at the moment. So, but signed for Saracens. We have Sarah Juvie as well, Maddie Grant, Sabrina Poulon as well, Paige Farries coming in for the backs, as well as Alicia Corrigan. And a very strong squad. Now, if there are certain names that you are wondering, why haven't they been included? Well, initially in the 40-woman training group, they listed some names that aren't going to be available, and they didn't specify the reason why. It may be injury, it may be due to other commitments. I feel like a lot of these players had to essentially, when it came to the World Cup, with it being delayed a year, had to have some deals in place, and some of them are just not able to make it to the Pacific Fours, just timing schedules and stuff like that. But certain names like Karen Paquin, she was listed as unavailable. Alex Tessier, Brianna Miller, Holly Phillips, Taylor Perry, Veronica Hannigan, Panthea Wusa, Michaela Nelson, Maya Montiel, and Chloe Daniels, and Brittany Cassil, Cassandra Tufnell as well. Those are the 10 names that were ruled out from the training camp, and as a result aren't included in this squad as well. But if you are looking to watch any of those games, the good news is they will be on TSN, and they will be shown this weekend and next weekend as the USA take on Australia in what looks like could be the battle for third place, and Canada versus New Zealand in what could be the battle for first. But just keep in the back of your mind that the top 3 teams will advance to the WXV Tier 1. So obviously getting that win under the win over the USA done and dusted. That means that even getting a win against one of the Black Ferns or the Wallaroos will hopefully secure Canada entering the WXV Tier 1. The news has come out this week that the Six Nations and SANZAR, who are in charge of the Rugby Championship, will be creating a new tournament that will be held every 2 years. And the basis of this tournament will be the Six Nations teams of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, and Italy, the Rugby Championship teams of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Argentina, as well as 2 international teams that have been invited, for a total of a 12-team format. The format will then be held during the July and August international windows in years outside of the World Cup or the Lions Tour. So this would essentially take place of the mid-year and end-of-year tests. And the format has actually been revealed that so in July, Six Nations teams would travel to play 3 different teams in 3 weeks. But instead of going to 3 different countries, they will just go to 2. One country will miss out on a home match, with it instead being played at a neutral venue, which I'll get back to in a moment. So World Rugby will not be in charge of this competition. This 12-team competition will be run and owned by the Six Nations and SANZAAR. And World Rugby, in a said, will host a parallel tournament for Tier 2 nations, so teams like United States, Canada, Chile, Uruguay. And so this new competition is set to begin in 2026, and promotion and relegation is said to be introduced in 2030. So I have some thoughts about this, mostly that this is going to be what destroys international rugby, essentially. Outside of the top 10, which I would say, which would be SANZAAR and the Six Nations.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from what you've told me, you just hate this. So I feel like I should just let you go for like a few minutes here if you want to.
I appreciate that, Derek. Thank you. So we're talking about these games in July in which one nation would have to miss out and would instead be playing at a neutral venue. Well, my guess is that Fiji and Japan are going to be the first invitational teams in 2026, and those are the teams that are going to be missing out on a home game during that time. So it'll probably be Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and Argentina. And the big thing as well is also just the traveling time. It's like, oh, is Argentina going to be the one team to concede their location? Will they then be based in like South Africa? Or likewise, would South Africa relocate to Argentina? Because obviously the Tasman Sea is far narrower than the Atlantic Ocean. So it makes sense that Australia and New Zealand be paired together. Then you have like the biggest red flag, which is the elimination of tier 2 nations or any developing nation, and would essentially just stifle off rugby for the growing communities within the world. So things like Chile qualifying for the Rugby World Cup, that may become a thing of the past. Fair qualification may have a massive knock-on effect for this competition, because it may just be a case that the idea is that the Six Nations will automatically qualify for the next World Cup. The SANZAAR nations will automatically qualify for the next World Cup, and in its current format, it's the top 3 teams from the 5-team pool will qualify, and that easily fills the criteria of SANZAAR and Six Nations. And then those 2 remaining nations that qualify for the next World Cup, those will just be the invitational teams, regardless of any further development. It's the thing of like, oh, World Rugby doesn't need to worry about them, so we will take care of them and we'll look after them. But if they don't qualify for the next tournament, then they're World Rugby's problem again. This is entirely being motivated by money. Yes, I understand.
Welcome to sports.
Yeah.
Welcome to professional sports, Stu.
Yeah, I understand that COVID did have a massive knock-on effect to rugby teams and unions. Like we've even seen like the fallout in the English Premiership, where 3 teams have now had to fold since COVID became an issue because of issues with paying finances and debt. Now, not to say that COVID is the reason why, but it's definitely the catalyst that got them to their current situation.
Sure.
And a lot of unions are struggling as well, especially with being unable to host events for 12 months. 12 months, especially during like peak rugby playing opportunities. Having zero ticket sales for a lot of the time because they'll have to be held behind closed doors. So I understand where it's coming from, but for an organization that wants to grow the game, this is a fantastic means of how not to do it. The only way I would be okay with this is that as a proviso for the Years of Alliance tour. So, okay, the next Alliance tour will be in Australia, which is 2025. The tour after that, which will be in 2029. So, we'll have a couple years of this new tournament going around. So, the Lions go and play New Zealand. We know that will definitely happen. What should then happen with every other nation from Sanzar and the Six Nations is that they must play tier 2 opposition. And it has to be in the tier 2 nations.
Yeah, they won't.
Nation.
They're not going to do that.
Of course they won't. But I'm saying that. But that's the only way that I would support it, is that if you're saying that,
in the off years they go play tier 2 nations.
Yeah.
They're not
well, with the exception of the World Cup, because that's like preparing for the World Cup, and then you have the whole thing of doing what they currently do now, which is they're not going to play any team from their pool in like the warm-up games. And but as in like in this idealized best case scenario, which is definitely not going to happen, but if I had my way as the ruler of rugby, and my global tyranny had stretched throughout the known universe, and I allowed the spice to flow, this is what I would say. It'd be then a case of these tier 1 nations during not only the July window but the November window as well have to have tier 2 have to go to the locations of tier 2 nations, and they have to play games there. Now you could see that from like a tier 1 perspective, which is okay. If that's the case, then we'll rest our like top players, or we'll take our top players if they've been injured during the season and they need to get back. We can bring a lot of young guys in. And for tier 2 nations, it's we get to host England, Scotland, Australia, South Africa, and also they can't get around this whole thing of like, oh no, it's a South Africa 15, so if we lose to Chile, it doesn't count on our record. It's like, no, you have to do this. You get to have your private tournament every 2 years. You get to say that you are visiting this country and playing them now. I know it won't happen.
No, it'll never happen.
But that's the thing. If you want to prove yourself you're the best, and you can't beat Chile, then I don't know what to say. I mean,
yeah,
that's my getaway around it. I think it's terrible. I think it's going to have a lot of negative consequences on rugby going forward. I think it sucks.
I also don't think World Rugby cares about tier 2 nations that much.
No, they don't. They clearly don't. They say one thing and do another. That's what I've gathered from World Rugby. And the sooner the old coffers who keep proposing up as an old boys club of left this world, the better. But that's just my opinion. Right. Let's focus back on MLR as we have the championship final this weekend. It is San Diego versus New England. Derek, I'm just asking you to pick a name. Who's it going to be that lifts the shield for the first time?
I'm going with San Diego. They've, I just kind of gushed about how their roster's constructed, but also like head and shoulders the best team all year. They maybe have a little bit of an edge because they beat New England. maybe a bit of a psychological edge. They beat New England in round, but that was also way back in round 2, so it probably doesn't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll go with I'm gonna go with San Diego.
I think it's going to be a very close affair. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be very tight. But just because you've picked San Diego and there is very little between these two teams, I'm going to pick the one that has more Canadians on its roster.
Fair enough.
That's going to be the choice for me. I'm going to go with New England.
I just want to say that if you picked first, I was going to do the exact same opposite team.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
I got the first pick though. I'll go with San Diego, but it's going to be a great game, man. It'll be phenomenal. It's definitely it's been they're the two best teams in the league, and these teams fully deserve to be where they are.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. Even as like going in as a neutral fan, I think it's going to be a great game.
Oh, it'll be phenomenal.
And
it'll be amazing.
And if you want to watch that game, and you're based in Canada or in fact anywhere but the United States, good news, you can watch for free on the Rugby Network. And as we mentioned before, the Pacific Force Series will be taking place on the same time on July 8th, and we'll have the games of the USA versus Australia and Canada versus New Zealand, and you can find them on TSN, tsn.ca, the TSN app, and TSN Plus. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as our written pieces on rougerugby.ca. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, S4P, and Apple Podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel at the Rouge Rugby with episodes of the podcast, as well as extra interviews with players and coaches. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all our videos. We're also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at the Rouge Rugby. Derek, where can the fine people find you?
At Brissette the Jet across all social media platforms.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode, Derek. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.